The last talk and presentation for this evening is Professor Julia Gog OBE, who is the winner of the Hedy Lamarr Prize for Knowledge Exchange. So this award was introduced in 2020 and is awarded to a mathematician who demonstrates meritorious knowledge exchange in mathematics and its applications. It was first awarded to Professor Rebecca Hoyle of Southampton. Who was from Southampton here? Someone was from Southampton today. This year it's Julia Gog. So Julia is Professor of Mathematical Biology at DAMT, the Department of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics in the University of Cambridge. She's also the David N. Moore Fellow in Mathematics at Queen's College, Cambridge, and a keen supporter of mathematics outreach and the director of the Millennium Mathematics Project. However, it was during the pandemic where she showed her mathematical greatness. She was a member of SPI-M and SAGE, where she made a very active contribution towards the COVID-19 response at the highest level and was frequently seen on television explaining the maths behind COVID to a general audience as well as to policymakers. She was and remains co-lead of the Juniper Consortium, which brought many universities and disciplines together to fight COVID in a truly interdisciplinary fashion. During this period, she also managed to find time to work with an outreach journal as well as appearing alongside the Deputy Chief Medical Officer in presenting the Royal Institution Christmas lectures. Our winner is an outstanding mathematician who cares passionately about knowledge exchange and outreach, going beyond any reasonable expectations by collaborating with the medical community. Who wrote this? Is that an unreasonable expectation? What have you got against the medical community?
My sister.
The media and education resource designers to develop activities which benefit schools across the UK. Because of this, she was awarded the Royal Society's Rosalind Franklin Award and lecture for her achievements in the field of mathematics. This is a fitting award for a brilliant mathematician and an exceptional exponent of knowledge exchange. I would like to invite Julia Gog to join me and receive her award.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of those, and you get one of those.
Right.
You should do it. Thank you. Right, thank you. And Julia will give her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the wonderful award. But not only that, to be invited to give a talk with no instructions at all. What a joy. So you're going to get just some random stories from me tonight, because this is what I want to do. Bear with me. So this is the Centre for Mathematical Sciences, University of Cambridge, where I work. This isn't going to work, this thing. Hello? Oh, I need to do the thing, don't I? Yeah. Mostly my story is about myself as well. So my day jobs, as Paul said, I'm Professor of Mathematical Biology in DAMT, which is part of the Centre for Mathematical Sciences. We have two departments in there. There's the pure maths and the applied maths. And my other half of my job is I'm a fellow in Queen's College, which is the one with the wooden bridge. So I'm also deputy head of DAMT now and vice president of Queen's, so you notice a pattern that I take on too many jobs. But the story I'm going to tell is I need to go back in time, right? So right back, in fact, Tony, I'm really glad to see you here because if I go back before being an undergraduate, Tony, you're a big part of that story. I'm quite sure without the British Maths Olympiad and such activities, I would not have aimed for Cambridge and mathematics and been hooked for life. Tony, thank you. So, became a Trinity Mathmo, and enjoyed maths, enjoyed everything about being a student, frankly. I did part 3, which is a weird name for something which is now a master's. It wasn't even a master's then, it was a certificate in advanced studies in mathematics, wasn't it? So I have a certificate for my 4th year. This is the less glamorous stamped as it was at the time. During part 3, there was a course on nonlinear pattern dynamics, and the lecturer of this part of the course was one Rebecca Hoyle, the previous winner of the Hedy Lamarr Prize. Part of this, she said, go and read this bit of this book about nonlinear pattern formation. So This is Jim Murray's amazing book of mathematical biology, which is responsible for a lot of trouble. So I read it, and it was actually quite provoking. So I went straight onto the epidemics section as it happened. And I can follow the equations. I can see, okay, S, I, R. Yeah, you can write down equations and call that susceptible infection. But in what sense has this object got anything to do with a real messy human epidemic? Is it possible for mathematics to actually tell us something about a real epidemic? Is it possible to tell us something of use about an epidemic? Or is this just a mathematical fiction and it's kind of entertaining? And that, I'm not quite angry, but it sort of provoked me to think about it more and more in a way that other parts of mathematics hadn't hooked me until then. And with the advice of Rebecca, actually, I made the jump. She said, if you really want to do math bio, go into a bio department, go and do it. So I went, I never quite got critical escape velocity to get away from Cambridge. I'm still there now. But I went as far as the Department of Zoology for my PhD, the whale skeleton. Since then, it's been turned around by 90 degrees and put inside a shiny building. So it's moved a bit, almost as far as me. PhD was in the disease dynamics group. Brian Grenfell was the lead of that group. This is recent Kyoto Prize photo. That was sort of around the millennium turn, 98 to 2002. My PhD, do you want the 10-second version of it? So SIR models, right? So susceptible, infected, recovered. Who's heard of them before? Fantastic, right. So now suppose I've got two strains, two variants, right? So what do I mean by S? Susceptible to both, susceptible to one, susceptible to the other, susceptible to neither. Okay, I need 4 S's. Now suppose I've got 3 strains. How many S's do I need? Lots, 8. So it's 2 to the n problem. So if I want to understand influenza evolution, I'm going to need hundreds of variants in a given year to understand how one emerges. You can't outcompute that, right? I'm not worried about AI in that one. When the number of equations you need is more than particles in the universe, that's not going to be. So it turns out you can make it tractable if you take a very particular set of assumptions and view the system in a particular way by thinking about how does the system look to the population, how does the system look to the viruses. Anyway, that's the equation. The rest of the thesis is sorting out how that relates to all the alternative models, which are more complicated, and lots of theorems and proofs about that. But during my PhD, do you remember the foot and mouth outbreak in 2001? Yeah. So I'm in year 3 of PhD. This happens. It's huge. You remember it was disruptive to day-to-day life, not COVID scale disruptive, but pretty disruptive. I think we've all got a story of something which was cancelled and moved, etc., right? And Brian was very heavily involved in the mathematical modelling of that, and keep an eye on this name, Matt Keeling, who was in Brian's group at the time. This was very exciting. Brian kept me at arm's length from this. I wanted to be involved. I really wanted to be involved. And he was like, no, you get on with your strain stuff. Do your thesis. But the foot and mouth stuff was Brian's group interacting with government. There was a lot of input and discussion with policy at the time. And all the elements of the COVID-19 story were there in terms of how science and government fit. If you remember, there was a political side of whether we could have a general election then or not. There was crappy data, there was data problems, there was lots of blaming the modelers, there was lots of the modelers looking back afterwards, did we do the best thing we could have? Could we do this in a better way? What do we need to do next? But there was a buzz around it as well, and there was a sense that the models were contributing to policy in a useful way. And I found that quite interesting, even though I'd been kept away from it at the time. But that's important for what happens next. So I finished my PhD. I move on to a research fellowship that brings me from Trinity to Queen's. I then have a Royal Society URF position from 2004. Still in zoology, but actually 2 years into it, I moved to maths, back to maths. A part of the Royal Society URF, there's various training courses and things you have to go on. I'm not sure many people would say that a training course was pivotal in their career, but one was, right? Compulsory science communications training course. It was run by Judith Han, who was presenter of Tomorrow's World when I was growing up. And it was Judith's husband as well running it. We had to do lots of homework beforehand. We had to bring things. We had to give short talks. Oh, it was hard work. And I came away with two things from that. One, an absolute agreement that I would engage with the next opportunity for science communications that came my way. Just having the guts to do that, and also having promised someone I would do it. And it was quite clear. Judith Ham was quite clear. My writing was not my strength. Maybe don't do the writing. Just maybe talking, maybe to kids. It's like, okay, I can start there. That's great. It's good to know where your strengths lie and don't lie. The next email to hit my inbox looking for someone to help with something was from Dr. Jenny Gage, who was part of the Millennium Maths Project. And it was, what has maths ever done for us? Come up with short paragraphs of things. Unfortunately, I couldn't actually make it to the session that she'd organised, but I thought, I promised. So I wrote, unfortunately, I can't make it to this, but I am interested in other. Within minutes, we'd arranged to meet for a coffee, right? And the upshot of those discussions was I took part, worked with Motivate, which was a unit that Jenny ran. Bear in mind, this is 2006, I think. It looks like Zoom now, doesn't it? But these were video conferencing with schools almost 20 years ago, right? This is a very clever use of technology. And that was the first time I came in contact working with Millennium Maths Project. And I'm really delighted Julia Hawkins is here this evening, who's the Deputy Director of the Millennium Maths Project then and now. Yeah, it was the start of many things, wasn't it? Yeah, so you can just see Jenny there, and Adrian, and we're obviously presenting some epidemic activities. Carefully put the camera so you can't see the kids, because we're not supposed to see the kids. So we came up with, we did some short video conferences, and then we had a series of video conferences where we worked with a set of schools over 6 video conferences. And we gradually realised, actually, you know, they can do more than we think. Actually, they could do some data collection. So the secondary school kids went to the primary school's kids to study the social networks of those groups. We taught them how to record that, how to anonymise that, how to turn it from lists into networks. And if it looks like we're sitting in a broom cupboard in the basement of maths, we actually are. I think they've done that room up now. It's much nicer. And for us, this was an outreach and engagement thing that we wanted to work with school kids. They could run their own projects. If they happened to get good data, that would be a double bonus. And blow me, they did. So they had some amazing data from a number of primary schools. And Andrew Conlon took the lead on writing this up. The spoiler of this is young kids don't really know who their friends are. They name each other at random. Mutual fraction increases as they get older. And then by the time you get to the older ages of, you know, you've got the girl clique, the boy clique. It's totally structured by the top end of primary school. And it was universal across all the schools. It was really interesting. So this was this outreach or was it research? Research leading to outreach, outreach leading to research? Anyway. Citizen science. Citizen science, we're getting there. So I then got a job in DAMT, the Applied Maths Department, which by that I carefully managed to be away in zoology for the years they were moving between departments. So I came back to a shiny department. So I was still working on the strain dynamics. I still am. I can't leave that problem alone. I keep thinking I'm done with it. And then it's like, hey, what if? Brain keeps doing that. I've worked on some bioinformatics, some looking for interesting signals in viral genomes. That was working with virologists. That wasn't a challenge. That was an absolute joy. But it's a different thing. It's not theorem proof. It's, are you sure enough to make your friend go and do a long experiment? It's a different level of certainty. And when you get nice steep signals like that, sure. I worked with experts on the immune system. So this is with Claire Bryant's group in the vet school. This is a macrophage. And this is the odd one out. This is not viruses. These are salmonella bacteria that are literally glowing green and red. And trying to understand the infection dynamics. It's just population dynamics writ small, right? The immune dynamics, super interesting. And then the space was really sparked by the flu pandemic in 2009, where we had some beautiful data from the US, which kept me busy for some years and has been the source of 1.5 PhD theses since then. So what happened next? Well, indeed, citizen science. It worked with the school kids, right? So what if we use the whole UK public? So this was a TV programme, which was broadcast in early 2018. And this is a talk in itself, but the speed version is we asked people to use their mobile phone to track where they were using GPS for a day, but also report some information to us, like who they mixed with, how far they thought they travelled, and a few basic things. The whole team is listed there, but particularly Petra Klepatz and Stephen Kistler were crucial in the first stages of the research on this. So the programme went out in 2018, I think it was March 2018. The data collection then ran for a year through 2019, actually it ran a bit further to summer 2019. We got the data late 2019. Remember, this is for some pandemic in the future. We were sort of got all the clearances and the ethical stuff in place, so we could start on it in early 2020. We'd arranged a beautiful meeting when we all got together, and of course, what were we talking about in that meeting? Not the BBC data. We were all full-time on COVID by then. So rather than, triumphant publishing, it was speed preprints. Let's get it shared as fast as we possibly could. The really key things from this for use of pandemic modelling. So this is just representing the spatial dynamics. We knew how people moved and mixed, rural and urban and different. How people mix by age. I've got no axes on here, sorry. Age groups in 5-year age bands from young to old, Darker the orange, the more they mix with that age group. So you've got a diagonal down the middle. What are the off diagonals?
Parents.
Parents and children, yep. And then general splurge of work and socialness. Yeah, so you get, very, very pretty patterns. And with all that, you can put that into models to make more accurate models. That one was particularly for the BBC programme where the source of the pandemic was Hazelmere. So there's all that. And sometimes people say, well, did the stuff actually contribute to the pandemic modelling? And it's quite hard to pin that down because a lot of it's buried in methods of papers which are in government things. But last week, a thing happened which Angela McLean was called up by the inquiry. And if we get to Q&A, if anyone asks me any questions about the inquiry, I think Paul will wrestle you out of the building, so please don't. So this is about the question about can you segment the population? Can you just separate the under 40s and over 40s and just let it rip in one group and the other group just waits it out? So this is Angela's response, who's now the chief scientific advisor to the government. You don't need modelling. You can just look at the data that we have about household composition, or we have beautiful data about who mixes with whom. I talked a bit about that with the BBC data. By that she means those matrices. And basically, you look at the off-diagonal rectangles. If they were white, segmentation would be an excellent strategy. There's not. There's all kinds of things. There's parents and older children there, lots of workplace mixing, lots going on. So that's just an example. I remember that's science communications, which becomes research, which goes into policy. So that brings us into SPI-M, which is mentioned, the modelling group for advice in the case of influenza pandemics. I now stands for infections, but before COVID it stood for influenza. In peacetime, it was occasional meetings, it was very light, identifying knowledge gaps, considering data flows that would happen in some idealised, very calm world, and none of that happened like that. But it was a standing group. If you look at what we were doing before the pandemic, it was reasonable things. What would happen in unmitigated? What could we do with pharmaceutical countermeasures? So there was, I think, about 3 of us who were independent academics who were on SPI-M pre-COVID, and as things ramped up, that number increased, of course. Just realised I've got Brexit here as well. I'm so sorry, everyone. And this is like, it's the most rubbish multiple choice in the world, isn't it? Just remember how bad those years were. So to sort of calibrate, we went into full emergency mode at the end of January 2020. Then we have the first wave, Eat Out to Help Out, next wave, Alpha, the vaccine comes in, then Delta, Omicron, you get the idea. So we were working full pelt the whole way through this time, and most of us were, I think full-time is an understatement of when we were working on this. One thing so I get to choose what I'm talking about here, I want to tell you about SPIAM is just some government committee. It's not, it's a bunch of humans, right? We're a mix of academics, mix of fully government people, some people who are a bit of both, contract slightly one way or the other, lots of people who work for HPA, it's UK HSA now, and lots of different bits of government as well. So diverse in who we work for, diverse in which sort of mathematical or computational, statistical, medical backgrounds we have. There was a really good spirit in this group, really good. We were trying to seek consensus. We did challenge each other, that was the key thing we had to do. But it was friendly, and we tried hard to ask each other the right questions to understand everything going on. It was a phenomenal amount of work under what can only mildly be called difficult circumstances for over 2 years. But please don't forget, they're a bunch of human beings and a phenomenal set of people to work with. Each of these could be a talk in itself. I did a range of stuff during COVID times, but some of this will not surprise you. The spatial patterns, of course, after working on the 2009 pandemic. B1617.2, also known as Delta. It's a variant, it's a strain. It's about how the virus is evolving, what happens when you've got two epidemics interacting. So some of those will make sense as fitting things I was doing before. Some ended up doing a lot about children and schools. And then there was this higher education working group, which was definitely one of the joys of this. So I got to work with Chris and also one Rebecca Hoyle in that group again. That was one of the most fun meetings to take different mathematical viewpoints of what was going on as well and have a chance to think it through there. But it's the side things. I found a little niche in writing after all, but only 2 lines at a time. Short policy explainers, short explains for policy folk. So this document here, it's called Note on Doubling Times or something harmless. The PDF name was Doubling Times for Classicists as it went around government. So, which I have a lot of sympathy for, right? So you've got no mathematical background, suddenly you're dealing with an epidemic and some complicated things are happening. And you're in a meeting and say, oh, the doubling time has increased. And you're like, is that good? Is that bad? It's increased, so it's going to take longer to double. I think that's good. Yeah. So what number are we aiming for with the doubling? We wanted to go off to infinity. And we're like, no, we want negative numbers for doubling times. Wait, so we need doubling time to go down first. And it's like, no, we need to go up to plus infinity and come back from minus. What? And I think, okay, I've got some sympathy. Would you like me to write a 1-pager? Yes. I've got things like confidence intervals will be bonkers into these documents that made it around government. So the need for that was there among senior civil servants, the public, and journalists, of course, who are struggling to get their heads around a lot of these concepts very quickly. The idea is, this is not so tricky, going to plus infinity and back from, but some of the ideas are really tricky, really finely nuanced. And the media interest was not neutral, right? There's political, big and small p, considerations there, and very, very emotive. It was a horrible thing happening. So I'm going to come on to the Juniper story now. So Juniper is a consortium. Do you remember Matt Keeling, who I mentioned in 2001? There he is. So together with Matt Keeling, we sort of very naturally coalesced this set of 16 senior academics who are working on COVID in some ways, which meant also all of our research groups. And suddenly we had a national consortium that we could function much more effectively with. Kira tends to avoid photographs as far as I tell, but she's here in person, so we don't need a photograph. So Kira is our senior scientific program manager, who did a phenomenal job in getting us to coordinate together, spotting the opportunities. Marvellous, yet dodged all photos as far as I can tell. Amazing. I'm going to come back to the scientific writing in a moment. This was a huge group, people at the start of the funding, a lot of postdocs, and you know, as a PhD student, I was kept at arm's length from foot to mouth. That could not happen in COVID. It was all hands to the pumps. We put extreme pressure on our graduate students and our postdocs, and they came good. The work they did for government was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Let's go back to the scientific writing. So this was absolutely built in, and we should have a chat one day and try and remember exactly how it happened, but it happened very quickly, and it was a very natural thing to do, is to have Marianne and Rachel as editors of the Plus magazine, actually part of Juniper, right, so built in. So Marianne and Rachel were free to come to any of our meetings, see what was going on. And this is a time when the drawbridge was firmly up from the modellers, because we were subject to abuse and a really hard time. We would have taken years to talk about some of the maths we did then. But with Marianne and Rachel, you're part of this. You could see what was going on. You could help us see what was, OK, you need to communicate this, or this is the right time for an article about this. And that was a great model for working as a consortium. And that was, I still don't quite understand how it happened, but Julia, I suspect you had a hand in it. And the idea is yes. This was a screenshot of the work of Plus with Juniper. I think the screenshot must be around December 2020, because it's careful with the Christmas bubbles. Baubles, bubbles. But I'm keeping that screenshot because the growth rate of COVID-19 is at the bottom there. Do you remember every Friday we got the R value, as it was called, which had come from a SPI-M meeting on the Wednesday and through SAGE and on Thursday and the next bit of government. Every week it was published, there's a little bit of text around it, and it would talk about R and the growth rates, and rather than trying to explain it themselves, further technical information on growth rate can be found on Plus magazine. That article was cited every week for over a year by government. And they said they couldn't have written it better, so it's, you know, obviously it's what they were relying on to use, so they're happy to send the public to the same source. And that was a quite good, I think by that point the idea of we write articles which are simultaneously for government and public was the right way to do things. I'm not going to dwell on this. If you want to know more about this, maybe ask Marianne and Rachel over wine, but this is an example of an article that has stuck with me. Angry Square. So I was sitting in a meeting, which, given it's been recorded, may or may not have been a SAGE meeting, when there was it was unlocking. It was early 2021, vaccine was rolling out. Can we release measures? And I could hear some people say, yeah, no, the R number is down far enough so we can unlock things. And other people saying, well, the prevalence is high or the prevalence is low so we can or cannot unlock things. Everyone was talking in terms of one measure or the other, when the phase diagram of this thing is fundamentally two dimensional. So it's like, if your R is too high, no, you should be shutting things, not opening them. If your prevalence is at NHS crisis, clearly, no, get your prevalence. And then some layers in there, and then the amazing layer, if your R is greater than 1, but you've got no prevalence, yes, you're in New Zealand, do what you like. And it was Angry Square, because I clearly just coloured it in on my iPad. But Marianne, this one was you, wasn't it? To turn it into more friendly, communicative, making sense to other people's square. And that was, with, I think Thomas House was part of the discussions there as well, Thomas House from Manchester. But if you want to hear more about that, ask Rachel and Marianne. Silver linings, the extreme interest also brought wider opportunities for science communication. People wanted to know about it. It opened some doors to it. Okay, it left people angry, but also interested. So this was filming for the RI Christmas lectures. Remember, Omicron was on its way in there as well. Probably a week later, we wouldn't have been able to film. Masks were off only for selfies or for the last performance or the actual performance. There's Kath Noakes there. Can anyone spot the Deputy Chief Medical Officer? He is sitting on the stairs. There's JVT. And he's lurking before coming on. This was absolute joy. It was just a career highlight to have an opportunity to do this. And it was really fun working with Kath in the same episode as well. Finally, a plug for a thing which isn't out yet, but we're very, very excited. Paul mentioned the Royal Society's Franklin Prize, and that came with some money, which gave us a chance to do something. So we've been working across the whole MMP, Millennium Maths Project, We're using the maths communication expertise of PLUS, of course, but also the school's engagement expertise from the Enrich side of the MMP. So we have designed a set of lessons for use in mainstream, not the special after school, mainstream Key Stage 3 lessons. This is age sort of 13 or so, the pre-GCSE years. Lots of videos, lots of interactivities, teacher notes, designed for teachers who maybe are not too confident in the maths themselves, and I've broken it. And that's going to be launched early next year. Bits of it have been trialled with schools. It's very exciting. So there's Rachel and I running some epidemics and me confused about something. The Lego exponential growth. And loads of these beautiful interactive, which Oscar has made. Don't underestimate these. I don't click on them during working days because once I start, I'll fiddle with them for ages. And look, I've worked in epidemics for a while. These are still interesting just to play with and see what's going to happen, these different arrangements. So I'm going to sort of end on a realisation and where I got to in this, right? So, you know, in some sense my career is research. That's where we started with this. I've got involved in outreach, talking to schools, getting people interested in mathematics and science and wider problems, communicating the science research ideas to a wider public audience, and policy. Sometimes I like to say I was forced into it because of the COVID-19, but you saw right at the start during my PhD, that foot and mouth application. I was fascinated by that, looking at the textbook, thinking, does this have real applications that interested in me? And I felt for a lot of my early career that these things were in tension, right? If you spend your time on this, you can't do that. If you want to get good at this, you can't do that. And I think I've decided, as this audience probably is thinking, obviously this is not true. So I finally twigged this. For a career in mathematical sciences, these elements are not in competition. They are in total synergy. Whatever combination of this that you find opportunity for and find enjoyment and fulfillment in, they really can work together. And there's a lot of fun and interest to be had in there. So I finally got there with the idea. Thank you.
I don't know how you find time to do all that. Extraordinary. I mean, it may be in synergy, but there's a lot of it. Any quick questions?
Earlier in your talk, you mentioned about rubbish data, or words to that effect. I can't remember exactly what you said.
I've used other words for it also.
I'd imagine, particularly in biological and social sciences, data tends to be very, very messy. What's limited work I've done in that sort of area has been messy data. How do you get around to trying to do real quantitative modelling when your data is very, very messy?
Oh, that's the whole art. Yeah, I haven't got a quick answer for that. I mean, normally something like the 2009 pandemic data, that was based on massive amounts of medical insurance claims of flu-like symptoms. That's huge amounts of data. It's covered like 50% of the US population. So from that, you can get some signal, but you've got to decide what it is that you can reasonably do with this and what you can't. I can never tell what strain of flu it is from that data, but I can see when it arrives in different cities. And then we spent years sorting it out, trying to see what is it fair to get from this data. Lots of cross comparisons with other known data sets, which so it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy.
And when you hit a serious pandemic like COVID, you don't have time to do that.
You don't have time for 1.5 PhDs on it. You have tomorrow. Yeah. Do your best. And it is just do your best. I mean, Graham Medley captured it brilliantly, which is like a pretty good answer today is much more useful than a perfect answer next week. Not that you'll have that, but it's different working with experimentalists. So the other strands I've worked there, you can do some back and forth and try and understand what can be done in experiments and the setups that different labs have, and try and angle your question. Your overall program is going to be, whatever you're interested in, but you can angle the questions within that to what the capabilities of the experiments are. That needs a lot of back and forth to understand what is doable and what mathematically. We've had these conversations where I've gone to Claire and said, well, how can we do an experiment like this? And she said, no, of course not. That's utterly impossible. And other times I've gone with her, do you think we could maybe do, yeah, we'll do it tomorrow. So I don't see what the difference in those is. And same thing back from her, she'll be asking, can you do this with maths? And it's like, I don't think so. And other times, yeah, I'll do that this afternoon. So it takes a lot of dialogue to work out what's doable for different fields. So that's not when you've just got a data set, but when you've got an interaction. But yeah, it is the whole art of working out how you can get there with the data.
Kathy.
So all the effort that you and your team and Spire and so on put in within the UK, do you think it was different what we were able to do in the UK with the expertise we had available than, say, other countries? That's a difficult question for you to answer, but
I'll give a few.
In the middle of it, do you think that we were better at doing that because we had a great capability in this communication and the mathematics research?
I'll give you a few thoughts, but this is a glass of wine discussion. So one of the things that makes UK, there's two things. There's one, the amount of capacity of different mathematical groups we had around such a range of different universities. We weren't all taking the same approach. We had a diversity in academe. The other side that gave us an advantage was government has science advice built in. There's scientific advisors in every ministry. Chief scientific advisor, there was a mechanism for stage to spin up, so there was somewhere for us to interface into. There are other countries that could have had brilliant scientific responses, but there's nowhere to dock into. And maybe vice versa, perhaps the science, there was only one or two groups that could really contribute, which didn't give you the diversity and challenge. I'm not saying we're best or better than any given country, but those were the two things I think set us unusual.
So, Celia?
I thought it was absolutely brilliant, thank you very much. I mean, just looking at your research, outreach, communication policy, if you had to pick which of those, can you pick out the main challenge for you? You did this phenomenal work. Which out of all of this was you really intractable and you wish you hadn't done it right or you'd do it again?
Oh, that's evolved over career. Yeah. It's definitely, which one my brain's most on or think is the main thing that I can do something has shifted around. Yeah. A PhD, it was definitely, I've got to get a PhD out, right? So it's purely the research, and at different times are doing different things. Right now, I've got the Juniper Consortium, so I can think about how things work across multiple groups. I've got space to think about how science and policy fits together. What were we really doing with the modelling? Where does it fit? How can we be sure of things? Was there something fundamental we need to think about ahead of, the next one? Or whatever the next challenge is, or the climate, Sorry, I'm waffling. There's lots of things there, but also I've got permission to think about outreach and communications in my MMP hat now, which is just a joy that's part of my day job. So I want to do all of it, basically.
That's the extraordinary thing, and just how much you are doing, and it's wonderful to see. And also, the thing that I would take from this, just the network of people that you work with. I mean, it's not a one-person show, and I think one of the lovely things that you've shown is the value of other people and community, and I think, for IMA, that's something that we've been really working on, but you've really shown that in spades today. So that's lovely.
Thank you.
I think that's a signal that wine is imminent. And more community. Can we thank both speakers, Chris and Julia, for their talks and putting the effort into that? They were both absolutely lovely. And thank you.